September 21st, 1992. Okay, I got some dope on those two you asked about Friday, Dean Copeland said over the long-distance phone line. I don't suppose you're going to tell me what this is about. Sure I am, Henry replied easily. Probably not today, but before too long, yes. Well, it looks like ancient history, anyway. The fat Tony you referred to would be one Anthony Ferrato of Atlantic City, former up-and-comer in the organization with a nasty habit of disfiguring and crippling prostitutes. He was killed January 7th of this year in Las Vegas. January 6th, Henry thought. That's the date she told me he had a heart attack. Mr. Ferrato was shot 4 times with a 9mm, 3 times in the chest and once in the left eye. Winchester 115 grain full metal jacket, if it matters. His action in New Jersey was taken over by a Mr. Carmine Mangini, also of the Atlantic City area. The killing was done while Anthony Ferrato was in the back seat of his car. Killed along with him were 2 of his torpedoes, one of them in the driver's seat. All 3 of the men were bound hand and foot. Want the names of the other 2? No, that's okay, Henry said. You find anything out about this Sal Marino? Yeah, he's in Vegas, mid-level type. Lives in a hotel, Henry heard papers rustling as Dean Copeland went through his notes. The Vegas Moon, he said when he found it. That's the name she told me, Henry thought. Marino's still around, but he's getting pressure from some of the mutts in California, and right now it looks like he's trying to keep his powder dry. Henry digested that, and then asked another question of the Detroit detective. What's Marino's connection to the dead guy, Ferrato? Funny you should ask. Ferrato came to Vegas to talk business with Marino. Michael Mangini, known as Mikey Mike, and son of Carmine Mangini, was working as a kind of apprentice to Marino, a training program, you might say, with the intention of returning to Atlantic City after a period of time to work for his dad. Which is exactly what he did as soon as the 3 guys turned up dead, and conventional wisdom has it that Mikey Mike made his bones on the hit. So the son shoots Ferrato and his 2 soldiers, and Dad takes over Ferrato's business. Sal Marino still friends with Mangini? Was he in on it, you think? Yes, he still does a lot of business with Mangini, and it'd be a miracle if he wasn't involved in the killing. I see, Henry said, not understanding where Cindy Caswell fit into all this. Dean, was there anything strange about the whole thing? The killing? Who did it? Anything like that? Anything that didn't look like a typical internal power grab? You tell me, Henry. There was a long pause, and then Henry Bowman sighed into the phone. Dean, the story I heard, told to me by someone who is afraid she's going to be hunted down and killed because of what she might have seen, is that this Ferrato guy did not die from being shot 4 times while tied up in the back of a limo. Bingo! I talked to the medical examiner, guy named Wong. No accent, probably 5th generation American. Anyway, I called him because I thought I might get some useful dope on the wound ballistics for my database. Dean Copeland had gathered more empirical data than any other person in the country on real-world performance of handgun ammunition in gunfights. His findings were being used more and more by serious individuals to dictate what loads they carried in their self-defense weapons. What he told me was very interesting. According to him, your Mr. Ferrato died quite some time before the other 2 men. It was also his best estimate that whatever killed Mr. Ferrato, it was not any of the 4 9mm Winchesters. Oh, Henry said, now even more interested. That's right. The wounds are consistent with the results we get when we fire into cadavers. The most interesting thing was the head wound. Wong autopsied Ferrato's brain, said the path of the bullet was obvious, and that there was substantial trauma to the brain that absolutely could not have been caused by that one full metal jacket bullet. He said he found minute wood particles, sawdust you might say, in the damaged part of the brain that was away from the path of the bullet, ran them through a mass spectrometer and came up with rock maple as the material. Why did this Ferrato's death merit such a big-time investigation? Henry asked. Dean Copeland laughed. I asked the same question. The short answer is it didn't. As far as the cops are concerned, Ferrato died same time as the other 2, of multiple gunshot wounds. Mikey Mike did it, even though he was Has 100 witnesses saying he was somewhere else at the time. Case closed. No, this pathologist apparently takes great pride in doing as thorough a job as possible, even when nobody asks him to. He told me his lab partner in 10th grade chemistry class needled him once about making up the results to some experiment, and he's never forgotten it. There's one more thing, he told me. Seems Ferrato was fortunate enough to get laid shortly before he died, although not fortunate enough to get off. The pathologist told you that? Harry demanded in amazement. Said any second-year med student could have called that one. Then I'm glad I went into geology, Henry thought a moment. The pathologist give you his opinion on what really happened if the guy didn't die from gunshots? Yes, he said that in his best judgment, Anthony Ferrato, either during or immediately after sexual intercourse, died while lying on his back from the effects of having a long wooden object, a long maple object to be exact, thrust into his eye socket and wiggled around enthusiastically. 8 to 12 hours later, his corpse was placed in the car and 4 shots were fired into it. You got a theory why they'd do it that way? Henry asked. Only one. The wise guys don't kill their competition in their own house. It's bad form. Also, they usually leave the soldiers alone when there's going to be a new boss. So why do it inside the hotel in the first place? Why not wait? That's the one that no one can answer right now. Henry was silent for a few moments before speaking. I may be able to give you a possible explanation before too long, if it means anything to you. Only academically, but yeah, I'd like to hear it, Copeland laughed. What other Detroit cop do you know that could get you the inside poop on a Vegas syndicate hit? You mean, you the man, Dean, you the man. Henry Bowman thought about the conversation for some time after Copeland broke the connection. I don't think Sal Marino, September 23rd, 1992. I don't think Sal Marino was looking for you. What? I talked to a homicide cop I know about with some good contacts in Las Vegas. Fat Tony Ferrato's body was found January 7th in the back of his car, shot once in the eye and 3 times in the chest. The bodies of both his guards were in the car with him. One of Sal Marino's buddies has taken over Ferrato's action in Atlantic City. Henry paused and then went on. Medical examiner said he'd been dead when the bullets were fired. My cop friend seems to think that Marino had already planned to have him killed. Then, when he died in the saddle, Marino set up a dummy murder scene. Did you order me a chocolate malt? Yes, why? Cindy Caswell asked. I mean, why fake a shooting? Because having Ferrato expire in the hotel while he was Marino's guest is against the mafia rules of etiquette, apparently. Cindy Caswell thought for a while about that, and then nodded her head in acceptance. Henry, she said, there's something I didn't tell. You know about Joe Colombo's attempted murder? Henry broke in. What? No. Who's that? One of the most instructive events in American history. A lawyer friend of mine thinks it should be taught in grade school. Ah, here we go, Henry said as his malt was delivered. Damn, these are good, he said, savoring the first few sips. Where was I? Oh yes, Joe Colombo, the guy that tried to kill him. Joe Colombo was a big wheel in the organization in New York City in the early 60s. Some other big wheel or wheels decided to take over Joe's part in the business. He or they hired a contract killer, some black guy, to shoot Joe in the middle of New York City parade. I don't know what they paid the guy, promised him or threatened him with, but he did it. Shot Joe Colombo in the middle of the parade, just like he was supposed to. Didn't kill him, but left him paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair. A few thousand witnesses were there to see it, and a couple or 3 television cameras filmed it as well. Henry took another sip of his malt and smiled. What happened next is the interesting part. Soon as the black guy shoots and paralyzes Colombo, 5 big Sicilian gentlemen jump on top of him. The black guy is buried underneath him. Don't forget, cameras are all filming all this. Okay, so there's this big dog pile of 6 people, and all of a sudden, whomp whomp, 2 muffled shots. The 5 guys stand up. There's one dead black guy laying on the ground with 2 .38 slugs in him, with a .38 revolver lying on the ground next to him. Smith & Wesson, I think it was. Anyway, the serial numbers on the gun have been destroyed with a punch, and every place on the gun that the shooter could have touched was wrapped with friction tape, including the trigger. Cops haul in the 5 big Sicilians and find out all of them test positive on the nitrate test. Also found out none of them have social security numbers. Guess which one they decided to charge with the murder of the black guy? I have no idea, Cindy said. Neither did the cops. So they let them all go. What? They let them all go? Had to. Not one of the Sicilians said anything. Not one single word. As soon as one of them claimed something, anything, the cops could go to work on that one thing, find out if it was true or not, get the guy on the stand, nail him for perjury if nothing else, whatever, take hold of the one loose thread and unravel the whole cloth. But there was no loose thread. What about the test? It tests for nitrates, which are found in both gunpowder and fertilizer. Cops knew if they looked hard enough, they'd find someone who'd seen all 5 of the men carrying bags of fertilizer that day. Even without the fertilizer, proving all 5 of them shot a gun since their last bath didn't make them guilty of murder. State had no case. They had to let all 5 of them go. Henry stared at Cindy Caswell. You understand the significance of this event? He asked pointedly. I think so. How did Fat Tony Ferrato die? Henry demanded. He had a heart, wrong, Henry cut in. How did Fat Tony Ferrato die? I don't know if... Wrong, Henry said again. How did Fat Tony Ferrato die? There was utter silence. How did Fat Tony Ferrato die? He repeated. Still silence. Were you forced to have sex with Fat Tony Ferrato? I hear the meatloaf here is good also, Cindy said pleasantly. Was Fat Tony Ferrato a sick bastard who liked to maim and torture the women he had sex with? I can't decide if I should have dessert or not tonight. Were you relieved when he had his heart attack? Were you glad he was no longer able to bother you? I was... She started to say something, then changed her mind. Going to have dessert, but I think I'll pass tonight. Henry smiled. Good idea. I think I'll order something else, though. He opened the menu. Oh, and one more thing. The medical examiner said that one of the reasons Ferrato's heart may have stopped beating was that after he had sex, but before he had a climax, someone shoved a piece of wood, maple to be exact, into his left eye and scrambled its brains. Henry watched as Cindy Caswell's eyes widened and her skin went slightly pale. You know anything about that? She started to speak again, then caught herself. Think you should try their French fries. They're really good here. French fries it is, Henry said, and signaled for the waitress. October 10th, 1992. As his GMC Sport Utility silently rocketed up the interstate's entrance ramp, Henry Bowman thought once again about how his old friend David Webb would have loved the boxy hot rod. It was exactly the kind of vehicle Henry had always felt the auto manufacturer should make for the kind of wealthy people who lived in St. Louis County. Stroker would be out raising people for money every time it rained, he thought with a smile. Henry pulled onto Interstate 64 East and kept his speed at 65 or a hair over. The back of Henry Bowman's GMC Typhoon was riding only slightly lower than usual under the load Henry had placed in the back. He had only 4,000 rounds of ammunition in the vehicle, along with all 5 of the machine guns he was taking. The other 12,000 rounds, all in belts, was being hauled by Steve Bush, another St. Louis shooting enthusiast. Steve had never fired a full automatic, and he had jumped at the chance when Henry had suggested he go to the big Kentucky machine gun shoot. Steve had left St. Louis in his 110 pickup a half hour before Henry. Steve had detailed directions to the range, but Henry expected to catch him on the highway before he hit the Kentucky border. With a full tank and an empty bladder, Henry thought, I ought to be there in 3 hours. Henry glanced in his rearview mirror and saw a bright yellow car approaching at about a 30-mile-per-hour speed advantage. Looks like a slope-nosed Porsche, Henry thought, as he watched the car move over into the left lane in anticipation of passing Henry's slower vehicle. Under normal circumstances, Henry Bowman would have ignored the other car. At the moment, though, Henry was heading for a big national shoot where he would get to see a lot of his friends from around the country, and he had been thinking about David Webb only a few moments before. Henry Bowman was in an exceptionally good mood. If Stroker were here, he'd insist on making that guy hate life, Henry thought with a smile, as he reached down under the driver's seat and turned a lever-operated valve on the floor. As a yellow sports car swept past him, Henry pushed the GMC's throttle to the floor. The 4-speed automatic dropped down 2 gears as the turbo rapidly spooled up. The tach jumped to a bit over 5,000 RPM, and the needle on the boost gauge moved into positive territory as Henry felt himself pressed back in the leather seat. At 6,300 RPM, the transmission shifted into third, and the boost needle blipped up another 3 psi as the turbine wheel suddenly found itself pressurizing a slower-turning engine. At 115 miles an hour, the Typhoon shifted into high gear, and the boost needle held steady at 8 psi. Henry saw that he was steadily gaining on the yellow German car. The cheap stuff ought to be burnt out of the lines by now, Henry thought as he reached down to turn a knob unobtrusively located at the bottom of the dashboard. When Henry had flipped the lever on the tank, he had switched to his auxiliary fuel tank. Aftermarket tanks were designed for people who wanted to extend their range of their trucks and sport utility vehicles, but Henry had installed this for a different purpose. The 12-gallon bladder was always kept topped off with 108-octane race gas that Henry bought in 55-gallon drums from the local Unocal distributor. The knob on the Nash controlled an adjustable wastegate. It was part of the GMC's newer, larger exhaust system that had been installed at the same time that Henry had the Typhoon's heads ported, the block decked and O-ringed, the crank balanced, the turbo scroll housing reworked, the pistons and rods replaced, a bigger intercooler and radiator installed, and the electronics reprogrammed for a different fuel curve. As Henry twisted the knob clockwise, the boost needle started climbing, and the GMC reacted as if a giant had poked the rear bumper with his finger. When Henry saw 20 psi on the gauge, he let go of the knob and put his right hand back on the steering wheel. Mike Garland was listening to the Porsche's compact disc player, and like all people who are exempt from speed limits, he almost never used his rear view mirror. 100 was a comfortable speed for long-distance cruising, and his only thought about driving concerned the sparse traffic that lay ahead of him. Out of long habit, he stayed in the right lane when possible, and only switched to the left when overtaking a slower vehicle. Like fast drivers everywhere, he hated left-lane bandits that clogged the interstates. But the fact was that Mike Garland had never been passed when traveling in the 90-plus range where the Porsche seemed happiest. He was totally unprepared for the black GMC wearing truck plates that blew by him with a solid 40-mile-per-hour edge. He stared at his own speedometer, then watched in amazement as the rapidly disappearing truck signaled with its right blinker and returned to their right lane. Henry Bowman focused his eyes far ahead of him on the highway, and was relieved to see the nearest vehicle was well over a mile away. He did not like to pass people at wildly extra-legal speeds unless those people were also flagrantly disregarding the posted speed limit. A lot of people on the roads were fundamentally envious and resentful of high-speed travelers, and the proliferation of cellular phones had given these drivers the ability to act on their frustrations. Got at least another minute, Henry decided. More than enough time. Mike Garland downshifted and gave the German sports car full throttle as the GMC became a shrinking spot in the distance. The European spec 3.3-liter engine was capable of pushing the sleek vehicle at a top speed 20 miles per hour higher than that of the little hot-rodded GMC, but Garland faced three huge obstacles to catching up with the vanishing truck. First, it would take time to accelerate up to a speed greater than the trucks, and until the Porsche got there, the GMC would relentlessly increase the already substantial gap. Second, the Porsche had not had a good front-end alignment since it left Germany, and although the toe-in was not off enough to notice at normal highway speeds, by 130 the car became disturbingly twitchy. Last of all, although Mike Garland had spent a lot of time driving at speeds over 100 miles per hour, he had virtually no experience in the 140 and up range. At about 145, discretion became the better part of valor, and he backed off. Mike Garland held the yellow car at an indicated 110 and watched in amazement as the distant GMC continued to grow smaller, and then vanished from his sight entirely. He reached out and tapped the speedometer, then immediately felt foolish for doing so. Henry Bowman kept an eye on the water temperature gauge and noticed with satisfaction that it did not rise above 180 degrees, despite the lengthy full-throttle blast. The GMC was reassuringly stable at 2.5 times the speed limit, and the exhaust note was not excessive, but the wind noise was something else. Back to the real world, Henry thought, as a clump of cars came into view and rapidly grew larger as he closed on them, at about 80-mile-per-hour speed differential. Henry Bowman slowly eased off the throttle, and the boxy vehicle slowed down instantly under the tremendous aerodynamic drag. Would have helped if the guys in styling had rounded the corners a little on the S10 before the GM skunkworks dreamed this thing up, Henry thought. Then he reminded himself that the GM's project planner's hair would have stood on end if they had been told what the boys at Ken Bell were going to do with their creation. Henry slid in behind a flatbed truck, traveling about 60 miles per hour in the right lane. The left lane was filled with 4 cars traveling the same speed. They were closely trailing a brown Lincoln whose driver was oblivious to the line of cars behind him. Henry was looking for a decent station on the GMC's radio when he heard a horn sound and looked to his left. It was a man in a yellow slope-nosed 911. He was waving and motioning to Henry with eating and drinking gestures. It appeared that the man wanted him to pull off at the next exit where they could grab some hamburgers and talk about cars. Henry nodded agreement and held up 2 fingers to indicate the second exit coming up. He had never seen a slope-nosed 911 up close. "What on earth's in that thing?" Mike Garland asked as he climbed out of his car. The 2 men were in the parking lot of a Hardee's restaurant just off the interstate. "This is the Typhoon," Henry explained. "Engine and trans out of a Grand National, hooked up to a full-time 4-wheel drive." Garland stared at the vehicle, and Henry went on, speaking with the courtesy that comes naturally to a victor. "It's the most sensible car I've ever seen. A lot of guys I know with cars like yours also have rural property with a half-mile of rutted, rocky dirt road leading from the state-maintained pavement, so they buy a Wagoneer, Blazer, or Bronco. They end up driving the beater on 2-hour interstate trips because the last half-mile would rip the undercarriage out of their good car. I always thought the solution would be if BMW would put an onboard air compressor and air shocks on their high-speed sedans. Let the driver raise the ride height 4 or 5 inches for negotiating farm roads. Might cost $300, and it'd be easy to incorporate an electronic governor so that the car couldn't be driven over 35 miles an hour when it was jacked up," Henry laughed. No one in marketing at any of the car companies ever approached that idea, but GM came up with an even better solution. Took their S10, put in full-time 4-wheel drive, independent front suspension, lowered ride height, wide wheels with Z-rated tires, and that intercooled turbo V6 out of the Grand National. Hit 113 seconds in the rain by my watch with no wheel spin. Henry grinned and laughed when he saw the man shaking his head. "I surprised you," he assured him. "You'd have caught me easily with a little more room. This thing's a barn door compared to your 911. Like any good street racer, Henry wasn't about to let on about what he had done to his engine. "Henry Bowman," he said, as he stuck out his hand. "Mike Garland." Henry eyed the license plate affixed to the rear of the German car. "You work for the government?" "Yeah, U.S. Customs. Confiscated vehicle. Guy was trying to smuggle drugs in it." "Mm-hmm," Henry nodded. This would be a good guy to know for ironing out problems with ammo import deals, he thought. A recent import shipment of Yugoslavian surplus ammunition had been held up for 3 months because the declaration form had not listed the importation of Yugoslavian straw in addition to the ammunition. The shippers had used straw as packing between a few of the crates, and the storage fees had tripled amount the ammunition had ultimately cost Henry. "Can I see the engine compartment? Not that I know anything about one of these," Henry added. "Sure," Garland replied, and lifted the rear deck lid. "Guy would have to be brain damaged to use a car like this as a smuggling vehicle," Henry thought to himself when he saw the mechanicals. "Customs would be all over it anyway. It's not even federalized. How much dope did he have in it, and how much time did he get?" There was a lot less coke than we expected, and he had a sharp lawyer, and we couldn't prove he had put the stuff in there himself," Henry nodded. "So what really happened is some schlep tried to bring in a Porsche that didn't pass your rules about air pumps and crash standards, and you snowflaked him so that you could steal his car and keep it for yourself without actually bringing charges." "You ready to go eat?" Garland asked. "Yeah, just let me get my road atlas." Henry opened the back of the GMC, then swore. "Damn, it's buried under these crates. Hang on just a second." Mike Garland looked on in astonishment as Henry hoisted 3 obviously heavy wooden crates out of the back and poked around in the vehicle before emerging with a battered atlas. Then Henry lifted the crates back into his truck and locked the back. "How much weight you got in there?" the custom agents demanded. "Oh, hell, not all that much," Henry said with a shake of his head. "Maybe 1,300 pounds. Going to a big military weapon shoot and demonstration in Kentucky, and I gotta have plenty of ammo for all the demos they've got me signed up for." He turned towards the restaurant. "Let's make sure we can sit somewhere with a view of the cars," Henry added over his shoulder. He knew Mike Garland was still slack-jawed over the GMC's weight penalty that he had just discovered. The pair had a pleasant lunch together and ended up exchanging business cards. Garland had promised that if he was given advance warning, Henry would not have any more problems like he'd had with the Yugoslavian shipment. Henry told him to give him a call when Customs wanted a live fire demonstration of the latest full-auto weaponry. Henry Bowman pulled off of Route 31 and passed a liquor store painted bright pink. Steve Bush was parked in the store's lot and started his engine when he saw his friend. It was in about a half mile they came to the big familiar sign at the entrance to the range that the range crew always erected for the shoot. Henry took the turnoff and was dutifully followed by his friend in the pickup truck. The Knob Creek Range was about 40 miles south of Louisville on property which adjoined Fort Knox. Decades earlier, it had been an artillery testing range, before it had outlived its usefulness to the military and the government had sold the property. The old steel tracks leading up to the firing line offered mute reminder that railway cars had been required to bring in the big guns and pallets of ammunition for testing. The hillside 400 yards away had an awful lot of metal buried in its face. Twice a year, in April and October, the owners of Knob Creek put on a machine gun shoot. Spectator admission was a few dollars, and spots on the firing line were $80 for the entire weekend. There was a 10-year waiting list for the latter, and most shooters ended up paying a reduced fee to get on the line as a helper. What the annual EAA fly-in at Oshkosh, Wisconsin was to people who loved to fly, or the Cologne show in Germany was to people who liked exotic cars, the Knob Creek event was to people who loved to shoot. 2 million rounds went downrange in a 3-day period. The organizers put out stacks of old tires, stripped cars, and junk appliances to shoot at. What made it more interesting was the bundles of ditching dynamite the explosives crew thoughtfully taped to the front of many of the targets. It was like a giant fireworks display, but with active involvement. Soon, the two Missourians passed some big open fields filled with parked cars, and a man in an orange hunting vest and orange cap stopped them. Henry already had his window down. Got a bunch of guns and over 15,000 rounds of ammo to unload up at the firing line, he said, jerking his thumb towards Steve to show the man that the two vehicles were together. We know the drill. The range worker smiled and waved them through. He liked people who brought large quantities of ammunition to send downrange. They were what made the shoot so successful. Henry and Steve slowly threaded their vehicles through the maze of cars, vans, pickups, motorhomes, deuce-and-a-halfs, half-tracks, armored cars, and tanks. Thousands of people were milling around, many with small children on their shoulders. It reminded Steve Bush of the big riverfront fair in St. Louis on the July 4th weekend, except that he had never in his life seen such an array of ordnance as was packed together along the 350-foot firing line. Henry stopped a short distance down the line and got out of the vehicle. We'll just be a minute unloading, then we'll be out of here, he said to a range officer who looked like he was about to tell Henry he couldn't park there. Unload the buckets right here, Steve. This is where we're going to shoot. The belted ammunition Henry had loaded for his water-cooled Browning was stored in 5-gallon plastic buckets. Each bucket held 4 coiled 250-round belts. It had taken Henry 15 hours to belt up 12,000 rounds of 30-06 and 8mm ammunition that Steve Bush was now unloading from the back of his trunk. Henry had filled the 48 cloth belts using a John Browning-designed hand-cranked belt-filling machine that had been made in 1918. Some people brought their ammo loose to the chute and loaded it into magazines and belts during the many ceasefires during the day. Henry preferred to load everything in advance and have free time to talk to friends and see who had what for sale. Is this your spot? Steve Bush asked, still a bit overwhelmed by the entire spectacle. No, I'm still on the waiting list after 6 years. This spot belongs to John Parker, but we're going to shoot on it. He's from St. Louis, so you may have seen him around, although he dresses like a bum when he's here. What's he do? Senior partner in a brokerage firm, Parker Gates and Company. He's pretty well connected, knows all the big shots in St. Louis, particularly the ones in finance and investments. I've sold him a bunch of machine guns, like that water-cooled Browning there. Sitting to the left of the chalk line that designated the right boundary of Parker's 6-foot spot was a 1917 A1 Browning on an A1 tripod with custom double-length legs. There was a pile of fired brass under it that Henry estimated estimated numbered about 6,000. Looks like he's shooting mid-50s Egyptian 8mm Mauser ammo, Henry thought, as he looked at the shape and color of the fired cases under the gun. 8mm Egyptian was corrosive and could be had for about 10 cents a round if you bought in 500,000 round lots. This was less than half the cost of surplus 30-06 ammo. Henry looked at the feed tray of Parker's gun. The homemade spacer there confirmed his suspicions. "Hey, Henry," a voice called in greeting. "You bring your Colt Monitor this trip?" "Shoot Landy's parachute flares out of the sky and piss him off again?" "Of course. What would Knob Creek be if we couldn't irritate Bob? How about your Minimi?" "Yep, got one of Reed's fancy suppressors on it. Supposed to outlast an M16. I'm going to see how it holds up on a real gun." The man grinned at this reply and moved on. "Who is that?" Steve Bush asked. "Some guy that's here every time. Half the people that say hi to me, they've never told me their names." He looked at the crowd. "We'd better get the rest of this stuff unloaded and get the vehicles moved. The parking Gestapo here have no sense of humor." Henry opened the back of his vehicle and started unloading the 5 guns he had brought with him. "Follow me," Henry said when he was done. "I'll show you where we can park this not too hell and gun from here." "Is it okay to leave your guns right there on the ground?" Steve Bush asked with a worried look. "Do you think anyone's going to steal guns in the middle of this bunch?" Henry asked, waving his hand at the hundreds of people milling around the firing line, over half of whom were carrying loaded handguns on their person. "You got a point. Okay, lead on." "Hey, Henry Bowman," another voice called. "You gonna turn your FND red tonight like you did last year?" "Probably," Henry said with a smile as he looked up at the man. The man turned to his companion. "This guy Bowman here, he likes bars. Shoots shit out of the air with them. Puts his Belgian one on a tripod last fall and ran, 20 magazines through the damn thing fast as he could? Turned as red as your electric stove and never missed a beat." "Bars are like that," Henry said cheerfully as he got into his vehicle.